Welcome back to another episode of Psych Thoughts. As always, we are here for you, I guess, is what I'm supposed to say. That's important. If you've been following along Psych Thoughts for a long time, you probably need some hobbies, but we're really glad that you do that. That means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share our videos with people you like and you don't like. As we've said on plenty of videos before, we don't mind being the fruitcake of your psychology-related shows. So send us to everyone, and they can send us to other people as well. My name is Derek Edwards, and I'm joined by my best friend and co-host. His name is Doug. How you doing, Doug?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Derek. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again this week.
Just to let everybody know that if this show intrigues you and you have psychological questions, you can just send them to us at psychthoughts at 10tech. What are you shaking your head for? Psychthoughts at
10tech.edu.
So
we might even ask you to be on the show.
Never know. Never know.
Man,
So
stay in your lane, bro.
Stay in your lane. So
Hey.
I'm trying to help you out there, brother. We had a viewer to post a question. Wanted to kind of ask us a question about some abnormal behaviors. One of them is they wanted to talk about a little bit about claustrophobia. Oh.
Yeah, let's go ahead and bring that up because we're evidently not going to introduce our intern today. Hi, Elaine.
Hi. I have nothing
Yeah,
to say
that's
anyway,
all.
so it's okay.
Yeah, no, you sit in your little square and you don't say another word. Doug has spoken. All right.
How did I speak?
We are done with introductions. We are moving into the show. So Doug, if it's all right with you, I'll read the email. Whatever you want me to do, buddy.
Well, they just they said that they were curious about claustrophobia because they'd always had a problem with it. You know, they felt, you know, sometimes they'd be in a room, they'd feel kind of smothered or different things like that. I know Elaine is got the email because I don't have the email with me. What was it? They said they felt smothered in a room.
I could pull it up like I've asked. You want me to read the email?
No, I was going to let Elaine read the email.
Okay, so
right.
Part of it is this person hates MRIs in small rooms. Even when they're in bed, they feel closed in and like the headboard or the dresser is bothering them. Dark ceiling on the bedroom feels like they're drowning. So, but this person refuses to avoid avoidance, as some people would say.
Great.
Well,
let's start with MRIs. Doug, have you ever had an MRI?
No.
Have you not?
No.
Oh man, what about you, Elaine? Have you ever had an MRI?
Yes.
They are not spacious. Like they're not spacious at all.
And usually you have some kind of health issue, which already makes you stressed to begin with.
Yeah, they've laid you on this table. You're in a paper gown, and they're like, "We're gonna stick you in this tube. It'll be all right." And it's not all right.
Is that the one that's really loud too when they're taking the pictures?
Yeah, you have to wear the earplugs. Yeah, not good. A CT machine is much bigger, and they have open air MRIs, but usually you have a hard time finding those in insurance companies, depending on where you live and that old chestnut. So if you have a bit of a panic reaction in an MRI, I think it's important for you to remind yourself that you are normal, because as humans are concerned, we don't really enjoy being in a tube very much. We're more like air kind of people than tube kind of people.
Well, you know, it's funny that you should say that, Derek. They think I read somewhere that claustrophobia is probably one of the most common of all types of phobias. They think that it affects maybe 7 to maybe up to 10% of the population is affected with that. You know, being in tight places, getting in an elevator that's crowded, being in a room that's got no windows. You know, things like that that you can't escape from. I think a lot of people, you know, you kind of go, ooh. You know, I had a cousin that did not like you to come up behind them and get them in a bear hug where they couldn't move. I would freak them out. They'd fight like all get out.
I will say, I don't think many people like that, Doug. I don't know if,
Well, I do.
like, have you had a different experience with that particular?
Hey, I'm
Now we know.
kind of guy, you know.
Especially from the back.
Well, it's worse from the front somehow. I don't know why, but as I'm thinking about it, Doug running up to you and just grabbing you from the front, that kind of creeped me out too. I don't.
It went from behind.
I don't even know what to do right now. The idea of you just running to someone and grabbing them where they can't move, and you're like, and he's got a problem with it. Can you believe that guy? Yeah. Yeah, I hate to side with your cousin there, Doug, but I'm on his side. I don't even know the guy, but I'm pretty sure.
All right.
Pretty
Y'all's
sure
my bear hug
he might
list.
go- Good. I would like to encourage you to put other people off your bear hug list, Doug. I think that would be.
Well, no. Now, if they ask me, I will.
Can you run up behind me and give me a big bear hug, please?
And now that's another question. Has anyone ever asked for a bear hug?
Well, now there was a group of people at Tech one time they had a sign that said giving out hugs. So I wonder what they've done. Next time they do that, I'm gonna stop and go, can I get a bear hug?
You have to pay more.
I will. I don't want to be walking with you when you stop and do this experiment.
Well, it's. I don't think it'd be as awkward if I went, can I have a side hug?
I think
You
side
don't know
hug's
what a
what you're
side
supposed
hug
to.
is, do you?
A side hug's what you're supposed to go with. That's running up behind someone and just wrapping your arms around them is not okay. You will go to HR and they won't care that you're like, my cousin hated it, but I got some other people who are pretty okay with it.
And that's a good outcome. You might get maced. You might get shot. You might get
I
stabbed.
end up married. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I just got to
I hate
say,
to say that.
if I tuned into this show and I was watching it, I'd go, I got to go to that university and take it to people. I got what is true and what is fact. Which brings up a little commercial. If you think you know me or you think you know Derek and his beard oil really well, there will be a game later on where you get to come on and see who you know.
But you have to email
One of
us
the
and give
questions-
us more information than I know Doug.
One of the questions might be, what scent is my Warlord beard oil? And that is for the bonus round. Because it's a scent unique to me.
And you think it sounds crazy about me giving a bear hug, but the fact that you said, what is the scent of my Warlord beard oil?
It does seem creepy too.
Like I said,
I think I heard that line.
when I run up behind you and wrap my arms around you and my beard is laying on your head, what do you smell? That's not what I said.
That's Southern
That's not what I
tobacco.
Yeah. That's tobacco from the southern region, I believe. I can't even with you right now.
Okay, I gotta say this.
Claustrophobia.
Before we go on, I do not randomly run up and give her campus.
No, it's too late for that. I don't think you could get out of it right now.
There'll be a big protest. Stop Doug from his hugging.
No bear hug.
I get out of it. I go, I'm a counselor. We're touchy people.
No. I don't. Oh.
So you're not a huggy person?
I love to hug. I never surprise people with a hug. That doesn't seem.
I just said I made the statement that I don't surprise people with a hug.
You said he doesn't like it, meaning you've done it.
Right, because he said he doesn't like it.
So you did it intentionally because he said he doesn't
Right,
like it.
if you can't torture your own family, I don't.
That's something you and I can't agree on, so that works.
So.
So this person has claustrophobia. It'd be nice to know more about where it started. Has this been something this person's always had, or is this something that there was a a triggering event or a traumatic event that occurred. Claustrophobia is a pretty common reaction when we experience certain types of trauma. So if you've been in a motor vehicle accident where you were pinned, you were entrapped, sometimes claustrophobia can be a thing. Kidnapping victims frequently will have claustrophobia. People who have been bound, so like prisoners of war, will have those, can have those types of reactions. So claustrophobia is about this inability to break free or inability to escape. So, which kind of goes back to this buried alive thing. And I wish I could remember the guy who put the bells in his tomb.
Well, I know Edgar Allan Poe was afraid, terrified even, of being buried alive. And he did some things.
He wrote that premature burial.
Who has the window?
Well, in the late turn of the century, I can't remember the guy, but they did have numerous accounts of where people got buried that weren't dead. And in order to make money and feed off of that fear, they had a device that it had a little string and a bell. And if you woke up in the coffin, you could ring the bell and they would know to come and dig you up, or it had a little pipe that went down. If you were in not a mortuary, but where do they keep you above ground? What's that called? A
mausoleum.
Mausoleum. You could buy a coffin that locked from the inside, so that when they shut the lid, there was a latch on the inside, so you could open it up and get out.
Well, if I remember correctly, a lot of Victorian caskets were also the ones that had those windows, or they were completely made of glass so that you could see in and out.
So a wake, what we know as a wake today in our death and dying culture, actually originated in this concept of being sure the person was dead. So, in our culture now, we have lots of ways of knowing. We can put an EEG, even if we're artificially making you live through your cardiopulmonary system. We can look at your brain and see if there's any brain activity, or we can look at your heart and see what's happening there. But in not so recent, not so distant past, rather, this kind of idea of being dead was a little fluid, right? You didn't know for a little bit. I actually have a great aunt. She's a twin, and when she was born, they believed that she was dead, and the ground was frozen outside, so they couldn't bury her right away, but they just put her outside, and then they heard her crying that night. So, well, that's a fun story to laugh at, Doug.
Well, that's just a random little horrible story. But that also made me think of another story. So,
well, I wonder if a lot of these victims of being buried alive were like coma patients, because of course now we know they're in a coma, but at that point in time, did they really know what a coma was?
Well, back then, the big majority to tell if he's dead, did you have a pulse? If you were out in the cold, you might not have one that you could feel. Or they put a mirror to your breath to see if you gave off any, and if not, then, you was dead. In developmental, when we talk about death and dying, death's not just an easy definition to come about, because you can be brain dead, but technically we can keep you alive artificially. Or, we could do all these other things. And so you have all of these certain criteria now that we have to meet in order to go, okay, they're dead, So it wasn't always that cut and dry. Medicine at the turn of the century and back then was intriguing. So.
Yeah. Intriguing is a good word for that.
Now,
there was some other things too, but intriguing is one of them.
Kind of back on the claustrophobia question, could it also be from lack of control or perceived control over any given situation?
Yeah, so there's an element of control when you consider your own ability to escape, right? I can get out of this. So sometimes people will have a claustrophobic response, and one of the real common ones is an aircraft, so like flying somewhere. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I'm in a small area, where escape is difficult since we're like 30,000 feet in the air. And two, I have absolutely no control over my outcome. You know, people who are claustrophobic sometimes struggle with being a passenger in a car. And we don't often associate that with claustrophobia, but it's still that relinquishing of control. This I can't hit the brake, and I don't know that you'll hit the brake when I want you to hit the brake. If you've ever driven with a backseat driver, another way of saying that, if you've ever driven with Doug in your passenger seat, then you'll see.
I do not hit the brake. I just hit the horn.
No, Doug once blew my horn at somebody and then rolled the window down to yell at them. My horn. I was driving.
Well, they were doing something. They were doing something.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they were doing. You need to stay off your horn. I was born and raised in Nashville. I've lived in this area. I spent a decade away, but I'm back now. When I was growing up, we didn't blow our horns at people, right? Now we got all these people coming from who knows where, and they're like, where I'm from, we blow our horns because we're jerks. And I'm like, stop it. You know, go back there.
Now that's funny.
Pretty good.
That's a funny statement, because I never blew the horn when I was in East Tennessee, but when I got a job at Vandy and moved to Nashville is where I learned to blow a horn and become a more aggressive driver.
That's because you have all those other people coming into Nashville.
The others.
The others.
We'll call them the others. Yeah, so we're talking about claustrophobia. That's a good one. So claustrophobia is going to overlap with a second subtype of disorder called agoraphobia. And agoraphobia roughly translates to fear of the marketplace. So people who have agoraphobia often have symptoms of claustrophobia, and the root's the same. Escape would be difficult. But the escape that there's talking about here is in a public place where there's like lots of people, so crowds can be pretty overwhelming. But it is important to note that most all people will have a increase in their sympathetic nervous system. They'll have an autonomic nervous system response in a big crowd. It used to be the case when women were having birth, they would stay in the hospital for a long time, and you had to kind of acclimate them back into like functioning. If you've ever been in the hospital for an extended period of time, that first time you leave the hospital door is overwhelming, and you do have a little sense of panic or nervousness about that. Now, what you do with that is what separates a disorder from just a pretty natural symptom. So with this person, if it started in an MRI, you know me, I'm going to start thinking, what else have they started to avoid? Mm-hmm. Every time we avoid an anxiety-provoking stimulus, it takes a little bit more of our life from us. So, you know, in the world of trauma, if that road was where that bad thing happened, and so now you go the other way, it won't be long before that road will get generalized into like an area, like a whole town, right? And then that will get generalized into some bigger aspect, and so more and more of your life gets consumed the more that we avoid. I always teach this and say that we inherently know this information, but we fail as adults to remember it. So I have 2 kids. We talked about that on the show before. Let's imagine my youngest, who is 6. Let's imagine that tonight she comes into my room and she says, "Daddy, there's a monster in my closet. What should I do?"
I used to have a Lysol can of spray that was covered with a wrap on the outside. It was monster spray, and we would spray for monsters, but it would smell like Lysol, so it would smell good. And that was to get rid of the monsters.
That's very pro coronavirus. Like that's pretty trendy before trendy.
Well, I think that's a fantastic thing. I think a lot of times, you know, we talk about this in developmental. We think there's no such thing as a monster in your closet, but then we forget I'm talking to a 5-year-old, you know, or a 4-year-old. And to them, it's hard for them to separate reality from fantasy. And I think sometimes, you know, you have to kind of go, okay, well, let's go in there and let's vanquish it with this spray or something like that. Because, you want to make sure that I think a lot of times we make the mistake of kind of going, there's no monster, go back to sleep, but in their mind, there is,
So what would happen if I told my 6-year-old, okay, just go ahead and get in bed with me and mommy?
It's going to happen
what
the
would
next
happen?
night and the next night
Yeah.
and the next night.
And then 13 years
preach,
later,
right?
I'll see him as a patient.
Yeah, and that's reality. I mean, that's exactly what that looks like. Is if I let her stay in my bed tonight because there's a monster, then tomorrow night she might stay in her bed for a little bit, but she's coming to my room. A month from now, she's not even in her room anymore. I might as well turn it into a gym, aka another room in the house I'll never go to, because it becomes this. I know there's a monster in the bed. So I've given her 2 lessons when I tell her she can get in bed with me. Lesson 1, you're only safe when you're with mommy and daddy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a terrible lesson. I want both my kids to know that they're safe with me, but they're not only safe with me. I want them to grow up and leave one day because I'm going to buy another Harley. I know it. It's going to be glorious. But I want them to feel safe at school. I want them to feel autonomy. I want them to have that. So that first lesson, you're only safe with mommy and daddy. It's a terrible lesson. The second lesson, which is the scarier lesson, there's a monster in your closet. Which, if I were to tell you, hey, don't worry, but we did let a murderer in your closet last night. But it should be fine. Just go back to bed. You're not going to go to sleep. It's not going to happen. So that's an example of how avoidance takes a little bit of more of that life away. So what do? You walk them into the room, right, with your can of Monster spray or whatever you've got. I'm a little hardcore, so I'm going to make them open the closet themselves, and they're going to look at me with their little hands shaking, and they're going to look at me like, man, Daddy's got some issues. But when they open the door, what's going to be there? Nothing. Clothes. Yeah. You hope, right? Yeah.
Or you're extremely unprepared.
Well, what do you know? They're walleyes. Wow.
They learn. Yeah, I didn't even bring my gun. They learn that they can confront their fear. We know this inherently as kids, but evidently I'm not going to be able to get this thought out of my brain until I tell you this story. So I was working with a patient, and that kind of situation that she had that I'm describing to you. A child stays in bed because of fear, and now this is just a new pattern. And now we're on up into our teens when this is happening. So we're going to transition their child into his own room. And I really have to talk up mom about what this is going to look like. And I give her that same story about the little hand shaking and all that stuff. And my phone rings the next morning at like dark 30, like it is way too early. And I answer it, and she says, I just want to tell you that I'm not mad. It's like, that's great. So her son was asleep and came and got his mom and said, there's something in my closet. And she said, I thought of you, and I knew I didn't want her to be in there. And it took everything I had to say, well, let's go check. She said, so I walked to the door, and she said, just like you said, his hand was shaking, and he threw open the door. I said, and then what happened? She said, a raccoon jumped out. So I'm pretty sure he still sleeps with his mom, and I don't really know what to do about that.
Well,
that story can go wrong.
To me, that seems like that was a little bit more of a therapy session of flooding.
You see, it's not a monster. It's a ravenous creature, honey.
Go
back to bed. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that people forget, and with fears, and when we talk about them in class, I always tell people it has to be something that's going to affect your daily life, because a lot of these fears are evolutionary fears. I mean, yes, you're supposed to have a little bit of fear of heights. Yes, you're supposed to have a little bit of fear of, being in confined spaces. I'm not afraid to go climb in a dark cave or something. Yeah, you're going to have a little bit of, trepidation about that, you're going to have a little bit of fear of snakes and spiders, because this is sometimes stuff that can kill you. But now, if you're like, okay, I think I have claustrophobia, and you're like, I can't get on an elevator, because I can't breathe and I'm going to have a heart attack. I got to take the stairs. Then that's a problem, because it starts interfering in how you function daily in life. I think a lot of times, students will go, oh, I've got that. I'm afraid of this. Like, I'm afraid of spiders. I have arachnophobia. I go, okay, so do you bug bomb your house every day and wrap everything in plastic and never leave? No, then you don't. You just have the normal fear that people have. And I think we forget that, because when you look at the diagnosis and stuff, it always tells you you have an excessive fear. It's not like, well, I have a modicum, but it's excessive. You just to the point of to being ridiculous. And I think a lot of times, I think people get really caught up in that, and they think, oh, something's wrong with me. But it's normal. I mean, like we said, that's a normal fear. I mean, fine.
So what happens? What happens if we continue to avoid these fears is exactly what you're saying, Doug. They grow.
They grow
to a point where one domain of your life is now consumed by this fear. Agoraphobia, fear of the marketplace, might start out somewhat like, I don't go to Walmart during Christmas season. And like, hey, whatever. Like, that's a fine choice. That's probably a good choice. But it then come to, now I can't go grocery shopping, period. And we've got a lot of mechanisms in our world right now, especially right now during COVID-19 times, that make it so easy to let these anxieties grow and grow and grow. In fact, you can make a really good argument that we are so obsessed with COVID-19 that we're now letting it take parts of our lives. Because the spectrum of concern about this coronavirus ranges from, let's go ahead and start licking doorknobs now, to we're all going to die. And our Twitter culture that we live in says that those are your only two options, when there's like a whole host of other options. I watched a man. I watched a man in a drive-through smoking while wearing a mask. He would pull his mask down to smoke and then put his mask up. And I thought, the thing that you're doing will kill you. Like, there's not a person among us that says, smoking is probably good for you. You're going to die. But his fear about something that likely won't kill him is somehow starting to consume his life at that point. So now I can have my groceries delivered. I can have O'Charlie's delivered. I can do all of my shopping on Amazon. And for those of us without an anxiety disorder, hey, those are nice conveniences. But I'd like you to keep in mind that for every one of us who orders Grubhub just because we didn't want to go out, there's someone who has to unlock 17 deadbolts to get the Grubhub off their porch, right? That this is another level of avoidance. I once worked with a woman who had 2 alarm systems with 2 separate landlines running to her house. And what started out as a simple home invasion turned into more and more of her life being consumed. It scares me in our culture now how easy it is to avoid crowded spaces, and what that will look like when it's time for that to be a reality.
I do have a question, because on the email it talks about that they feel like they're drowning in this situation. Could that actually be like a medical issue, not just a psychological one?
Now, any clinician on the mental health side will tell you always rule out medical first, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to therapize COPD out of you. Like, tell me about your COPD. And you're like, my chronic emphysema is really a burden. I'll be like, set that burden free, and we burn some toilet paper. Like, that's not going to work, right? So certainly, if we feel like we're drowning, you tend to be the referral we want to make there as a cardiologist or a pulmonologist. But we start with our general practitioner. Assuming all of those tests are fine, we have to realize that drowning is exactly what a sympathetic nervous system reaction feels like. If you're having a panic attack, you feel like you're drowning. You feel like you're dying. Now, what's the secret? you're not. And the moment you allow that panic attack to consume you and then pass is the moment you throw that closet door open. If you come to my practice and you say, you know, I have panic disorder. First of all, whatever, I can say that. One key of panic disorder is you have to have a fear of the panic attack. That's you must have that in order to have panic disorder. So I'll ask you a simple question. How many times a day are you having panic attacks? And if you say, oh, no, it's like daily, but not multiple times a day. So let's say you're having 7 a week. Well, my prescription would be the next time I see you, I need you to have had 14 of them. I want to double your panic. And they usually look at me crazy, like, well, you're a jerk. I hate you. But by willingly accepting the panic attack, you take the fear away. In essence, if the next time I see you, you don't have a fear of the panic attack, whether or not you're still having panic attacks, technically you've cured yourself of panic disorder. And now we can start dealing with the panic attacks and why you're having them. Does that make sense? So how do we avoid avoidance? We remind ourselves that in the moment, we're not dying. Mm-hmm. It feels like we're dying and that the threat response we're having, and to Doug's point, is usually natural. I work with firefighters who go up, 110-foot ladders and even higher. And they're like, some of them are afraid to be up that high. It's like, good. Because if you fall from up there, you're going to be a puddle down there. Yeah, you're not walking away from that one, Jim. Like, I'm glad you're afraid. Now let's do it anyway.
Well, I think that what you said is really true. It transcends a lot of different things. When you have fear of something or you look at something different, you give it power over you. And when you confront it or you acknowledge it, then it doesn't have that. That's like, they tell you one of the best ways to handle anger. I love it in class. Best way to handle anger, vent, vent, vent. And I go, no. You're just rehearsing. The best way is just to forgive. I said, because think about it this way. If I made Derek mad, then all he had to do is just look at me and get mad. Then that just says I have control over him. This person who I might not even want to make Derek mad, I've made you mad. And I said, by letting that go, it doesn't have control over you. And I think that's, what you were saying. And a lot of people go, well, that now I see it. The more knowledge you have about something, the more you confront it, the more you take away from its power. You kind of go, oh, well then I'm not afraid of that. I realize there's not a monster in the closet and I can do this to protect myself. Thus, I'm not afraid anymore at night. So
when I was working in a psychiatric hospital, I would frequently have people have panic attacks in groups. In group session, because we're talking about real things and they're highly emotive moments, and catharsis can be scary for people. And inevitably when you're working in a psych hospital, there's going to be a nurse. So you would have that runner who would run out and go get the nurse, and they would bring back some type of benzo, a little yellow helper or something like that. And that patient in the psych hospital would put the benzo on their tongue and drink the water and then go, okay, all right, I'm better. That benzodiazepine has a 15-minute onset of action. Your panic attack is done before that benzo works. But that's the medical model. And what I want you to hear, what I don't want you to hear is that I'm telling you to stop taking your meds. I'm not saying that. What I do want you to acknowledge is that every time you take that benzo, that's one more part of your life that you're allowing your anxiety. You're saying, I am incapable without this pill. You don't have to fight that hard, and you're welcome to take the pill. You will never see judgment from me. I teach psychopharmacology every fall, and anybody who's had me, unless they were just like some real bitter person, will know that I never will shame you for taking a pill. I won't tolerate you telling me you can't, right? Especially a short-acting pill that doesn't fix anything, right? That doesn't make, that's just another example. We used to give people who had agoraphobia or panic disorder, they would wear a necklace that had a capsule in it. on it. And then in that capsule, there would be some type of short-acting benzo. Just wearing that necklace, according to research, just wearing that necklace reduces the frequency of panic attacks.
Is that
Tell
like
me that pill?
like in psychopharm when you would talk about people that were doing things to get ready to use drugs, be it heroin or whatever, just the process building up to that was actually calming them down even before the actual drug itself.
Yeah, so the person who's addicted to an opioid, and we'll just use heroin for a cod example, if they're mainlining heroin, so they're injecting heroin, simply tying their arm, or maybe down here they're going to inject in their hand or something like that, simply putting the tourniquet on will start to release dopamine to their frontal lobe. It's an anticipatory reaction that they know it's coming. So they start to feel better. Don't hear me say stop using your opioids cold turkey either. You will seize, you will die. Don't get medical help for all of these things. What I want you to hear as we run out of time is, if you have one of these types of disorders which causes anxiety, I'd like you to dig in to where that anxiety is coming from. What's the fear response? What are you afraid of? And then what are you catastrophizing? That panic attack's not going to kill you. So if you're afraid you're going to die, that's one less thing to worry about. We'll have more episodes on this. Please send in your questions. Psychthoughts@tentech.edu. Somewhere on this page, you'll see a subscribe button. Click that button. Feel free to leave us a comment. Find us on social media, Psychthoughts on Facebook. We're on Instagram and we're on Twitter. Until next week, that's all for me. What about you guys?
That's it.
That's it.
Right.
See ya.
See ya.